In today's episode, we're talking about living off the grid, and I have Stephen Shade from livingoffgrid.com, and he recently just wrote a book, 221 Tips and Tricks from Master Gardners, and right now you can get it on Amazon for just 99 cents. So if you have a buck to spare, I recommend getting the book. I just got done skimming through it, and it's great. I'm going to go back after this episode and read a lot more on it. So first off, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Travis.
Absolutely. So let's jump in. First off, why get off the grid? What's the benefit of getting off the grid?
Well, I'll start by telling you a little bit of my motivation and why I started my learning path on trying to become more independent. It started with watching a documentary called Food Inc. And in that movie, I learned a lot about where our food comes from in America on these industrial-sized farms and these factory-style raising cattle and chickens in these big, large warehouses. And then I did some more research over time and realized that I can't make a big impact on changing the world, but I can control my little 5 foot square space in front of me. So uh, I started thinking, okay, what can I do to reduce my impact on the world and try to reduce my carbon footprint, so to speak. So then I started looking into that and decided that living off the grid it would be not depending as much on electricity and the power plants, not depending on the farming, the styles that they do. And plus, I wanted to give my family organic food that I knew where it came from, and I wouldn't have to worry about all the pesticides, etc. So that's my motivations of why I want to get off the grid. But there's a lot of other reasons too. One of the main things is getting back to nature. You know, you're learning how to grow plants. You're kind of getting a little bit further from the city in most cases. So I think it's worthy thing if you like going hiking or camping. Living off the grid's great. It's a lot peaceful.
Yeah, I'll tell you the reason I'm the most interested in it is more the getting back in touch with nature, getting back into our natural environment. I mean, it's really messed up, basically, in my opinion, how we live today, where your cell phone's ringing constantly, you have emails, you have like multiple monitors. I spend most of my day in a sit down position in front of like 6 inches in front of a monitor. That's not
Right.
natural, you know?
Yeah, and in the modern society, it's definitely not the way we used to live as man. And they also, on that same lines, the Amish kind of have that older lifestyle where they have a farming lifestyle, no very little electricity or no electricity, depending on what sect you look at, and they have a lower rate of depression than
Hmm.
everybody else. I mean, so there's got to be doing something right here, and we're obviously not in tune with what we should be doing.
Yeah, I fully agree. The human brain did not develop in these kind of circumstances, and I honestly don't think it can handle it as well as we want to say it can. Multitasking is not a thing that exists. We invented that word because we thought, because we do three things really bad. The brain's really good at doing one thing, not five things at once.
Right, right.
So let's
And
figure out, how do we get off the grid? So the first thing I know you've talked about is decide how far off the grid you want to go. And what do you mean by this?
well, different people have different opinions of what they are willing to give up. I mean,
Mhm.
some people need to go to the mall once a week or once a month or something. So you might want to live pretty close to the city or try to be within a half hour from the city. Some people don't want to see people at all, so then they'll end up in Alaska, on their 5 acres, an hour or 2 hours from the next living person.
That sounds
So it
cold.
depends on what you want to do. So you got to think about the conveniences you have and what you want to give up and what you like. Uh, Plus, there's other things to consider. Like my wife has a hypothyroid problem, so she depends on a thyroid pill every day. So we have to get medication. So we can't get that far off the grid because we have to come in and see the doctor every 6 months and make sure we have the right prescriptions and be able to pick up our prescriptions once a month. So it all depends on what kind of health condition you are, how much work you want to put into raising your own food. Because some people might not want to do food, but they want to do the electricity. So there's all kinds of different what levels you want to go.
the next step you have on your website, and I'll put a link to this in the show notes, is create a plan. And how do you recommend someone goes about creating a plan to get off the grid?
Well, you got to decide. I kind of laid out the steps there to start your plan for you, so that's a big start. But you got to decide what you want to do and break it down into small parts. Anything you want to do. It's just like when you're trying to eat an elephant, one bite at a time. A 1,000-mile journey begins with one step. So take your goal and write it down, and then try to break it down into tiny little steps, and that way you can know how to get there. Because otherwise, you'll have this gap, and you'll just never get to where you're going. And the biggest part of making a plan is executing. So taking little small actions each day to get yourself towards your goal will help.
That's awesome advice. I believe that almost in any aspect in life, whether you're trying to get off the grid or just get
Yeah.
your homework done or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. So that goes with starting a business or anything you want to do in life. That's pretty much how you need to do it.
So let's jump into the next thing, which you've just got done writing a book about, and I think you're a pretty much an expert on, is starting a garden properly. And I know before this episode we were talking about how, to me, the idea of starting a garden, it's like, yeah, that's easy, and I've never really done it. Just plant some seeds and you'll have food a month or two later. But I know it's not quite that easy.
Yeah. So with gardening, it starts with the soil. So you want to start with good gardening soil. You can either create your own compost or you can buy the soil from the store. And then when you want to start small for your first garden. You want to pick 3 or 4 different kinds of plants. You want to pick a little, maybe a 5 by 10 area to start your first garden. And you want to start small because you don't get overwhelmed. And one of the biggest things to remember is each plant has its own needs, its own temperature needs, its own environment, how much sun it wants, how much water it wants. So you're going to have to learn each plant. So when you start off, you're going to be learning how each of these 3 plants work, or 5 plants, whatever you decide to tackle. And there's you want to start small. That's a big thing. And then when you first start your first garden, I also suggest that you buy plants from the hardware store or the Kmart, Walmart, because that way you don't have to worry about starting your own seeds indoors, because that's a whole other thing to tackle. And
Let me ask you a
I would
question.
say,
If
what was
you
that?
what 3 to 4 plants do you recommend starting with? And I assume it's food type plants like fruits or
Yeah,
vegetables. What 3 or 4? I mean, it depends on your climate, I'm sure.
right.
But let's say, for instance, in your climate, and I'm not sure, are you in Arizona currently?
Yeah, we're in Arizona, high desert, Kingman, Arizona. So,
What 3 to 4
yeah.
plants did you guys start with?
So I started with peppers and cantaloupe and watermelon and zucchini and tomatoes. I'm actually in my first garden. I think I alluded to this in the article. I started with some onions too, but I messed up the onions and killed them all the first time.
What'd
So,
you do wrong with onions?
well, I bought the small I bought some. And you don't buy seeds; you buy small plants. So they look kind of like green onions when you get them. And the key is you got to plant them right away. And I made the mistake of sitting on them for 30 days or something, and then they basically rotted instead of putting them in the ground so they could survive. So I killed them off before I even got them in the ground.
Hmm.
It was a sad day.
So what other advice do you have on starting a garden? Because once again, to me, it's like, all right, you have the compost, you plant it, and then to me, it seems like a waiting game. But I assume there's a little bit more complexity than that.
Yeah, I mean, you can get as complex as you want, because there's a lot of these. It's nature, So you're dealing with the whole system design here. You're dealing with the bugs and the soil and the sun and all that. My biggest advice would be water consistently. Here in Arizona, it's kind of warm, so I have to water it every other day. So that'll really help you when you're gardening. Watering consistently. That's the most common mistake people make is, oh, I forgot to water today. Oh, I can wait till the morning, or stuff like that. And then the plant starts to struggle in the drought conditions and doesn't function as well. It goes into a kind of a shock state, and then you water it, and then it kind of recovers, and you just won't have good consistent growth that way.
Mm.
But if you stick to some of the hardier plants like your squashes, then it'll be a good experience for your first time go around.
And where do you recommend people go to find out what plants that they should plant their first time around? Because I know it depends on your climate and it depends on a couple
Yeah,
other factors.
the climate's really important. So a lot of colleges, almost every college in the United States has an extension office, and it's for farming. It's a farming extension office, and you can just type in, California Extension Office, and you should be able to find it. And if you do a Google search, and then you can call them, and they'll have advice on what you can plant for your climate. There's local extension offices in your town. I know I have one here in Kingman, and Kingman's a pretty small town, so they'll also help. You can also find farmers markets or even gardening clubs. I know in Kingman, for example, there's a master gardening club, which you can definitely join and bounce ideas, find out what your neighbors are planting and where they get their seeds. And that's really where you're going to get your best advice because it's localized advice for your own climate.
And you said that you started out with how big was it was a 5 by 10 foot
Yeah,
plot?
I was a little ambitious, so I think it was like 10 by 20 is
Oh wow.
about area for me, and I got about half of my plants survive the first year, my first garden. But then I just never forget how amazing it was to eat those cantaloupe that first year all summer long. So that was really great.
And that was my next question. I mean, I don't know if there's an approximate number of like per 20 square feet you could feed one human for 10 days, or is there any kind of numbers on that?
There are some numbers on that. I don't know them. If you look, there's a lot of good books out there on homesteading.
Mm.
You can look them up. They show you, you need a half an acre of wheat and you need one or two cows and that sort of thing. But there's lots of different ways to go. If you use aquaponics, for example, I think it's a 20 by no, I don't know. I think it's like a 10 by 20 greenhouse. You can grow enough fish for your family for a year, and as well, the fish, the way the aquaponics works, it's a biological cycling. So you're using the fish waste to feed the plants, and that you can grow, and the plants filter out the water and feed it back to the fish. So it's a cycle, and you can grow your vegetables and your fish at the same time.
That's
And
awesome.
that's enough, and that can almost feed a family for a year if you get a greenhouse with that in it.
Do you know how much it costs to set something up like that up?
Not yet. I got some statistics that I looked up on my website. How much does it cost to go off the grid? I have a blog post on that,
Hmm.
so that can help a little bit. That's the next step in my house is I'm going to get myself a greenhouse, um, so I can try to learn more about aquaponics myself.
Is there any other mistakes you see people making when they're starting a garden?
The biggest mistake people make is they start too big, and I even made that mistake myself. And another, it might seem a little funny, but emotionally speaking, you don't want to try to get too attached to any one plant because there's a lot of things out there that can get your plants. So, between tomato worms and aphids, etc., and mites, you're going to lose a couple of plants. So you might want to plant a little extra and let it go if you lose a couple.
How do you, obviously you don't use any kind of pesticides then. So what kind of natural things do you use to keep the worms away and things like that?
So for tomato worms, I actually just use the old school examine method when I just watch the plants and I look for the bugs. Uh, but for aphids, I try to attract ladybugs, and you can do that by planting flowers because ladybugs also eat pollen. So you want to try to. There's a lot to learn about it, but it's kind of a permaculture type of ecosystem gardening, organic gardening. There's a lot of different plants you can plant that are support plants that uh, help monitor the bugs, and you can plant things like marigolds help scare off bad bugs too. So uh, there's a lot of different things you can do.
All right, that's a lot about the basic gardening. Let's jump into hunting. And I know you don't have as much experience with this as the gardening, but what kind of things, what are some of the basic how-to? Because to me, it's always been the idea, and I haven't been yet, I want to go. It's always been, all right, point a gun, shoot it, and you're done. But it's more complex than that, obviously.
Right. So with hunting, you need to find out your local laws. In Arizona, we actually have a lot of it's a government land that you can go hunt on, and a lot of the other states have basically hunting clubs where all the land's already purchased. So in order to hunt, you have to hunt on private land, and all of those private land they charge a fee to get on their land to hunt the animals. So not only you have to buy your tag, your hunting tag, but you also have to buy into these hunting clubs so you can get on their land to hunt. So Arizona is actually really popular for hunting because you don't have to buy into these clubs. You can just go on the public land. So the first thing really is to learn. Go to your game and fish department and learn about it from there. Get your tag. Find out if you get drawn to go hunt or not. And then of course you want to get a gun. I don't know much about guns because I haven't actually gone hunting yet, but my whole family does. My brothers-in-laws, actually one of my brother-in-laws is a guide here in Arizona. So if you hit me up, I can get you in touch with him. But after you got to track the animal, so you got to figure out what his behavior is. They almost all big game go to water, so you got to find a water source. Check for tracks and see if there's any fresh tracks, and then you could either follow the tracks, or here in Arizona, a lot of people actually just use their 4x4s and do what they call car hunting. So they just drive around and
Out of here.
look
Wow.
for elk and deer that way. I don't necessarily want to do it that way myself. I'd rather do a traditional hiking around tracking. So then after you find your animal and you picked it out, you shoot it. You always want to aim for the chest cavity of the heart. Usually it's right behind the shoulder, kind of like where their armpit is. And then the hardest part is, or well, I know the hardest part, but the messiest part is now you got to clean the meat. So they're in the field, and you got to get it cooled off pretty quickly, otherwise it'll start to go bad. Most of the time you're hunting in the wintertime, so you have that advantage. But if you're not careful, you could have some meat go bad on you.
Wow. Okay, so there's a lot going into that. And actually, a quick side question that I was thinking of as you were talking about that is there some top locations that you'd recommend people that fully want to get off the grid go? And I know you mentioned Alaska. Is there any other ones that where food's relatively plentiful, there's good hunting, good farming, all that kind of stuff?
Well, there's definitely some. I think I mentioned this on one of my articles. I think I did mention it in that how much does it cost to get off the grid article. Is that there's some really good farming land back east in I think Indiana and Virginia. Those are some of the good states. So you can do a Google search, best states for gardening, and there's some states out there with already great soil that you could use to plant with. And I live in Arizona, so to get my soil where it produces good plants, it takes a lot more effort. I got to put a lot more inputs into the land. I used mostly horse manure, cow manure, things like that to help get my soil more fertile so I could plant.
Awesome. All right, so let's really quickly actually let's go back to the hunting. Is there any other tips or anything that people just don't realize about hunting that we didn't talk about before?
Well, other than having to, a lot of people are surprised that the gutting part is
Yeah.
it's pretty tough. And then a lot of times too, you're either a hunter or you're not a hunter. Some people don't have a problem killing an animal, and some people do. So don't feel bad if you're not that type of person that can kill an animal. You let somebody else do it, and you just either trade for meat or you share, or you don't do that part of living off the grid. It's all
Yeah.
up to you. So then the other thing to think about with hunting is that one of the great things about that meat is it's natural meat. It's as organic as it gets. It's out there. It's eating the forest or in this case the desert, depending on where it's doing, or the brush out there. So it doesn't have any antibiotics in it. It doesn't have any unnatural feeding habits like they do with the cattle here in America, feeding them corn when cattle aren't supposed to be eating corn. So that sort of thing. So it's really organic, great meat. A lot of people are out there kind of, oh, game, I don't know, but it does taste different than beef, but it's really good once you try it out.
Yeah, there's a lot of health benefits. I mean, even grass-fed beef compared to regular corn, regular, sorry, but
Yeah.
the processed corn-fed beef that you find everywhere, it's a huge difference. And like I
Oh
notice
yeah.
a difference in the flavor, and there's been tons of studies on the difference in health. And I've heard that grass-fed beef has about as much omega-3s as salmon, which is like known as like a huge omega-3
Right.
fish. So.
Yeah. So if you feed the animal what it's supposed to eat, then you're going to get a lot better nutrition out of it because it's going to have a lot healthier diet itself.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And there was a quote, I believe it was on the Tim Ferriss podcast, that basically was like, if you don't know what you're eating, you have no idea what you're eating. Because it's like you're eating this Franken food, and it's like it's not real nutrition. So yeah, that's a whole thing we could probably do a whole episode about.
Oh yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to grow my own food as my first priority is because I actually moved in with my grandfather-in-law, and he's got a 3.5 acre plot. So, and I'm a little bit outside of town. So now, then I figure my next step would be to try to get this food management down, and then I can save up for some solar panels in the future. Because solar, it, let's face it, solar panels are expensive.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that actually kind of brings us perfectly into the next topic, which is livestock and how to manage livestock. And once again, this is one of those things that to me sounds like it should be easy. I have a dog. If I can raise a dog, I should be able to raise a cow. But I'm sure it's more harder than just that. So can you talk a little bit about how to raise livestock?
Yeah, I can allude a little bit on that. I've actually started my livestock, and I suggest everybody does, with something small like rabbits or chickens. I started with chickens, and I had no idea they are so cool.
Oh yeah.
They, yeah. I thought they're dumb animals or whatever, but they have some personality, and they will follow you around, or they'll come up I actually have my chickens trained where they walk up to my 5-year-old daughter and they'll kind of lift their wings up back behind them and squat, and that means that they want Ella to pick them up. So then they'll let you pick them up and pet them on their head and stuff, and they produce eggs like nothing else. I have half a dozen eggs every day coming out of them.
How many chickens do you have?
We have we actually had 9, and a couple. My dogs actually ate a couple of them, and then we actually just bought a whole bunch more, so we're up to 14 now.
So they lay an egg like every other day, or how often does a chicken lay an
Well,
egg?
we had some white ones, which are called leghorns, and they were laying every day. And the new ones that we got this spring haven't started laying yet because they're still in their teenage kind of maturity, so they're not quite laying yet. Later this summer, they'll start to lay. Um,
Is there any difference between the different breeds as far as the quality of the egg you get?
As far as I know, no. As far as like nutrition wise,
Yeah.
different chickens do lay different size eggs
Hmm.
and different color eggs. But most of the time, I think the nutrition's about equal. I'd have to do some research on that. I don't know for sure, but I'm
Okay,
pretty
yeah.
sure this.
I grew up like most people with the white eggs, and then all of a sudden, the first time I ever saw brown eggs in the grocery store, it looked exotic to me. And exotic, you usually think of like, oh, that's probably better for you or tastier. It's more or
Yeah.
less the same, but I didn't know if there was something more to it than that.
Well, yeah, that's probably a marketing technique. It's organic, so it has to be a different color.
Yeah.
I don't think that was actually any other reason than that.
And what do you feed your chicken?
Well, I actually buy feed from the store, and it has a mixture of corn and other grains in it. Uh, but I have 3.5 acres. I try to let them out of their coop as much as possible, so they can go eat bugs and eat grass that I have growing or fruit that's fallen from the trees. Uh, the more protein and grass that they eat and the less corn they eat, the better they are.
Mm.
Better eggs they produce and the healthier they are. So I try to do that. Well, there are dangers. Here in Arizona, there's coyotes, and there's also raccoons and things like that. So you got to be careful how you got to make sure you close their pen at night.
Yeah.
One of the nice things about chickens too is after you let them open, during the day, and the nighttime they always go back to roost.
Mm.
So you don't have to chase them around and try to get them back in their pen. They just go back on their own. And that's really nice.
That is awesome. So after you've mastered the chicken, what's the next livestock you recommend getting?
Well, depending on you always want to check with your city ordinances whether or not you can have livestock to begin with. But I live in the county and there's no restrictions. So the next thing I'm looking at getting is goats because they're a little smaller. You can butcher them for meat, and they do produce great milk and cheese and yogurt. And you can also make soap out of their milk. So that's my next kind of adventure. I'm going to try to learn how to do all those things.
And do you tend to get a goat that just does milk or a goat that's just for meat, or do you have the same goat for both things?
Well, that's a good question. There are different breeds that work better for different purposes. The goat I'm going to go for is a Nubian. This is a type of breed, and it's really good for milking, and it's okay to good on the meat.
Okay.
There are other breeds that are focused just on meat, and they're not so good on milk. But since my focus wanted to be on milk, I'm going to get a Nubian.
And what about the male goats? Are the male goats just used for meat, or is there a reason you don't use the meat?
No, for the males, you'll have to have at least one male to mate with your female,
Hmm.
and then when after the female gives birth is when you take the calf or I guess it's a billy, no, it's a kid. The
Okay.
baby goat's a kid. So then you take the kid away from the mom, and then you're able to milk her, and you got to keep milking her. I think it's twice a day, even just like cows, which is another thing I'm worried about getting into because then I'm gonna have to milk her twice a day, and that's
Yeah.
gonna take some time. So I gotta be ready for that added chore, but it should be worth it to get all that fresh milk for us. So then after the kid's born, you can either keep the females to continue growing your herd, or you can raise them and butcher them for meat. Male or female is good for meat, but the males obviously can't give you milk. So those are the ones you usually,
Take them
yep,
off. Yep.
usually, yeah, usually process them. That's the nice way
Process
to
them.
say it.
All right. And what about cows? Is that something you're looking at getting in the future, or is that too big of an ordeal at this point?
Well, for me personally, I live in Arizona. There's not a lot of grass, so I'm gonna have to worry about feeding my cows outside inputs from like an alfalfa farm somewhere else.
Hmm.
So I don't like the idea of having to bring things into my land. I'm trying to get like a zero scape where I'm raising my own food for my own animals, etc. So with a cow, you need about an acre of good grassy land per cow per year. So I you know I have 3.5 acres, but it's mostly weeds, tumbleweeds, and cactus and stuff. So
Hmm.
in the desert, you need more like 5 or 10 acres of that for one cow to have it graze on your land. So I don't. I'm leaning away from cows at this time because of the size of my property and where my climate is. But if you live in, say, Ohio or something, a cow might be right up your alley because then you won't have to do any really work to maintain it. It just goes out and eats your grass.
Yeah. Okay. So we've gone over starting a garden, learning to hunt, livestock, and of course, something we've alluded to is getting solar panels. Is there any other steps that people need to take when they're trying to get off the grid?
Yeah, I would say that you should learn a little bit about passive solar design when you're building your house and try to look into thermodynamics and learn about how to design your home efficiently. So that way you don't have to use as much electricity to heat and cool it. And so that way when you do build your off-grid home, it can be very efficient. Some of the people build earth ships out of used tires and things like that because the natural earth temperature is about 54 degrees. So if you can dig your home into the side of a mountain or something like that, you tend to be a lot efficient as far as cooling in the summer, and then once again in the winter, heating, because you're going to bring yourself up to 54 at least, and you can stand 54 with a blanket.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, and then another question for you, and I know you're not fully off the grid yet, but I'm sure you've thought a lot about this kind of stuff. Once someone does fully get off the grid, is there still a use for money? Like, is there still, or do you just start bartering? Because I assume if I were to get fully off the grid, there's going to be a day when I'm like, I really want a mango right now, and I don't have a
Right,
mango tree. So what do you
right.
do in that kind of a situation?
So once you're off the grid, you're probably still going to need some money. I estimate about $1,000 a month,
Mm.
because you're going to have things like health insurance. You're going
Oh,
to have things like property tax. You're going to have other things like electronics and things you might want to buy, that you're definitely going to need a little bit of cash.
yeah.
But if you design your homestead right, you can have surplus, and you probably will. Some plants are really bountiful, more than you might think. For example, I have 4 or 5 peach trees, and when they do produce, I have peaches come out my ears, so I
Mhm.
can't even get rid of them fast enough. So if you plan properly, you could can that up, and then you could have go to farmers markets, and you can sell them or trade, and you can get a part-time income that way. You could also start, say, a website like Etsy or something, where you're selling different crafts or whatever. Or you can wait till you're retired, or but you probably want some kind of residual income.
And most people listening to this episode probably aren't going to, completely cut away everything, go live off in the woods. But what do you think are some good steps that people can take after listening to this episode to get a little bit more off the grid?
Yeah, well, start thinking about, all the things you depend on. Start thinking, okay, I depend on electricity to heat my water, or natural gas. I depend on my car to get to and from work. Depending on this apartment building or this neighborhood or my house. And start thinking, okay, well, if everybody in the world disappeared, theory, it's just kind of a out of the box idea. I would lose. What would you lose? Start thinking of all the things you might lose. And then start thinking of maybe a backup plan of how you can survive without those things. Instead of electricity, maybe you get some lamps, some oil lamps for light. And, so you're not, a lot of times you're not going to be 100% off or prepared for any situation, but the less impact you have, the, the less impact you have, the less stress is on the system. Because right now we're having a lot of stress on the farming. We're expected to grow in the next 30 years by 3 billion people on the planet. So there's a lot of future problems that we have, strain on electricity and utilities and food systems. So the more you can learn about it right now, the less impact you will have on a global scale.
And I want to shift gears here a little bit and ask you a bigger question. What advice do you have for people in their 20s? And this could be anything. It could be related to getting off the grid or something completely unrelated.
Well, for for in your 20s, you really want to focus on figuring out your passion, what you're going to do for your life. So figure out uh, the things that you like to do, the skills you have, and try to put together something that you're good at. Try to find out your superpower, and try to figure out a way that you could use that to provide value to others. And it could be in a job, or it could be as an entrepreneur, or it could be, in the health field. It could be any type of situation. But the sooner you discover what you can do to wake up in the morning and tap dance to work, so to speak,
Hmm.
you're going to have a happier life. So your 20s is this opportune time where you can experiment. So I really encourage you to say, okay, what am I interested in? And go try that for 6 months, and then go try something else for 6 months. But really try not to get tied down too much to any one thing for too long, until you can discover that thing that just really lights your fire, and you can do for a long time. And then, if you like something for a while and you're going to experiment, you can always go back to it. So the 20s is a great time for that. And then the other thing I would say is keep educating yourself. You just got out of high school or whatever, just got out of college, but don't stop learning. Yes, life is full of learning, and the more you learn, I don't know who quoted this, but one of my mentors I talk to or I follow, Ty Lopez, says this a lot. The more you learn, the more you earn. So it's definitely important to keep learning when you're out there.
I love it. I completely agree with everything you just said. Stephen, thank you for coming on. Where can people find out more about you and connect with you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at log_man, and you can find me on my blog, Living Off Grid Guide, and I think we have a Facebook page too, but I'm not on there as much. So
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
thank you. It's a pleasure.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, make sure you hit the big red subscribe button down below. You can also check me out on Facebook and on Twitter, and I release a new video every Monday, and by hitting that subscribe button, you'll get those new videos every Monday. And this is really a podcast. It's also a website. You can check out the website. It's howtodoyour20s.com. I'll put a link right over here as well. And what it's all about is trying to improve your life. And we specifically focus on things that people in their 20s are interested in. So make sure you like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, whatever. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again on another video.